Hey guys, I hope you're doing well today. I've spent over 10 hours working on the updater. It's been over 24 hours. It's been over 24 hours since I first started it actually, and now I've finally completed it and perfected it. And I'm going to show you how to create or integrate the updater or how to set it up. There's two ways. The final product can be done in two ways, where you can either let Tauri show the user that an update is available, or you can take care of it yourself. So in the Google Keep app, I've let Tauri take care of it itself because I don't have control over the front end. It's just a website wrapper. So it can show up like this, or it can show up like this. So when I click a refresh, a notification will come to the user and you can install an update. This can be customized however you want. This is just in my template on how I've done it because that's the easiest way to do it. You could show a modal as well if you would like to do it like that. But I think a notification is best because that's kind of how I did it in my music player as well, except it was a system notification, not this kind of notification. But I'll be showing it both ways, as well as how to do the server-side code, which I've done in Python, Flask, by the way. So let's get started. The first thing you'll want to do is go into your configuration. Now, so in your configuration file, and if you're planning to use the dialog, then you can follow the Google Keep Desktop app template. So you turn on you activate it, and you set up an endpoint. So for both of these, for either scenario you're doing it, you want to set up the same endpoint. It doesn't really matter. So the endpoint I've decided to go with, instead of having my own app URL and a subdomain that requires maybe two servers, I decided to just use my own personal website for Tauri releases. And since this is called Google Keep Desktop, I've added that and I've taken care of the target and version. Target means the operating system, so it's Windows, Linux, or Mac OS. I'm not sure if it's Mac or Mac OS which gets sent, but I know it's Windows that gets sent on Windows. You can even use what's that called? Localhost links like this. So you could do HTTP localhost slash carry. You can do that and run the server code if you want to debug the server code on locally or debug the app locally and have your server running locally. That's what you can do as well. And what else? Yeah, that was IPv6 by the way. And then if you want to use the dialog, set it to true. If you want to do a custom integration, turn dialog off. And next we need to, what's this public key? So this is a signature public key. So now we get to go a bit about security. So when we're doing this updater, we want to let the user update with comfort. We don't want to have them freaking out over whether an update can be hijacked by an attacker or a hacker. And so this is where encryption or hashing comes into play. And what happens is that we use a private public key to communicate to our users that, or to the Tauri client, that this is in fact a valid update. So now we will look at how to create this public or private public key. And you can see here it says Tauri signer generate -w and a path to a file. So this is actually not the way how to do it on Windows because of some things. So the way to do it on Windows is to use yarn. So you do yarn Tauri generate -w, and then you copy the path to .tauri. You'll need to create the folder .tauri, by the way. And to access it, you can go to documents and then go up. Nope. I actually just have this folder pinned, but it's from users. You go to users and then you go to your username and then you go to Tauri and then you create the .tauri folder, okay? You copy this path and then you do /app.key -f for force. You don't do force yourself. Then you enter in a password. And twice and remember your password, okay? So now that you created the key and the public key, you want to print that out. So on Linux, you can use cat, and on Windows, you can just drag and drop the public key to your editor and copy that public key and paste it here. Next, you'll see that environment variables used to sign. Tauri private key, path or string of your private key, Tauri key password, your private key password. If you lose your private key or password, you'll not be able to sign your, yeah, that's fine. So this says it's optional, which is false. It's a misleading because you are forced to enter a password here for your secret key, which means that if this environment variable is not provided, Tauri will ask you when it's building the app. And last week we talked about how to distribute our app to create those builds. So that means that these variables have to be set in our GitHub action. So now we're going to go to our GitHub action. So over here, I'm going to show it in my Google Keep here first, and then you can either look at the template or you can look at the whatever. But we go here, and we basically see that we have to add something in, which is environment, Tauri private key, and Tauri key password. And we want to use secrets. So we do secrets.tauri private key, secrets.tauri key password. But how do we add these secrets? Well, we go to settings, go down to secrets, actions, and now click new repository secret. Now this secret name is Tauri key password and Tauri private key. So just add those there from one you remembered and one's from over here, which is the encrypted private key. All right. And then we should be good. So do this for, I'll do this for the workflow. I'll add that part in so that you guys don't forget. So that if you do enable it, you don't have to worry too much, as I will also need to do that in my own app. So now the build will actually work after you do this. So you can test it out if you want to. It's not really important at the moment because you're still developing your app, but I will show you what happens instead. So now there's 12 assets. So what's included is the original assets as well as the signing, the updater assets, which end in a .archive or a .archive.signature. And the signature is just used to verify that the binary is legit or the archive is legit. All right. Now, let's go back to what we were talking about. So after we've added the public key, if you want to do a custom integration, we might need to have some APIs enabled, maybe not. No, we don't need to have any APIs enabled. It might be prudent to have relaunch enabled, but it's not necessary in the current state of affairs. Actually, it's just necessary in case things work differently on Linux and Mac. So that's why you should have relaunch there and enabled. But moving onwards to the main thing. Now that we've set this up and we know how the updates look like, let's look at how the server is supposed to run. So if we scroll down here, we can see that their server support needs to do a couple things, which is we can update depending on the target and the version. So the target is nothing but an operating system, so Windows, Linux, or Mac. I'm not sure if it's Mac or Mac OS, but I'm not even sure if I told you guys this already because I've recorded this multiple times, and the current version. Now, they'll say something that if no update is required, your server must respond with the status code of 204 no content. This is false. Your server does not need to respond with this code. I've tested it myself. But, and what else is true is that your version needs to be a version that optionally starts with V. Why is that? Well, Tauri does version checking. So even if you return something, Tauri will do a version comparison. I figured this out the hard way, so I'm just letting you guys know. So instead, we can do it this way where we return different things based on the target, and we don't know it's going to be Windows, Mac, or Linux, which is kind of annoying. So there's also another way, which is to return a JSON format of the different, for downloads of the different platform. Now over here it says update file JSON format. The alternate update technique uses a plain JSON file. See, this is false. The other thing could use a plain JSON file. You don't actually have to return a JSON file. It could just be a JSON response. Like it says here, it's just waiting for an application slash JSON, which is somewhere up there. It's not really relevant, but you don't have to return a file. They're just suggesting it could be a file, like a static file. But how do we generate this in the first place? Well, I don't plan on using static files, so I will show you how to do this now. I've done this in Python, so you don't actually have to worry about it too much. And it takes care of everything, actually. So over here is my Python code. I have licensed it under Creative Commons 0 1.0 Universal, which means you can copy this without worrying about me suing you or anything. I don't care. You don't have to license it. You don't have to show that you got it from me, because I believe in a world where code is free, basically, like you don't have any restrictions on it. And if you want to hide stuff, you should hide your stuff. You shouldn't open source things you don't plan on other people using. But this is not a philosophical video or a political video. This is just me showing you how to do stuff. Anyways, I'm using Flask, so I have a blueprint just for ease of sake. And like I said before, this is Tauri releases. So if I decide to build different apps, I could just keep on adding URLs like this with their API URLs and using the same generic function. I've made this function generic so it works with anything, any API that has releases like this, like a release API like GitHub. All right. Now then the endpoint is taken care of here, which I will explain now, and then we'll get into get release. So we get the latest release, and if for some reason the GitHub API fails, we want to let us know through Discord or element notifications, like a bot. And otherwise, we want to do a version check. So we will follow their guide to not return anything, because if we don't return anything, that's just a short circuit and it saves on network data or network throughput. So it's better to do it this way anyways. So I've done a latest version equals latest release version, and then I split the string and remove any starting V's. Even I do that on the current version as well, although current version is probably like this and does not start with a V. But, I said maybe it's possible, so that's why I did it like this. Package.json is I'm not sure if package.json enforces semantic versioning, or someone could write down any string. So that's why it's like that. And over here, I do a check. So if you're familiar with this, it basically means that if the current version is in any way equal, if the current version equals the latest, it just raises the value error, okay? And I guess I shouldn't do it like this. I should just do it if latest equals current version, or latest equals current version, okay? So if the current version equals the latest version, then we want to basically return nothing, okay? And after that, you may want to, suppose you want to just have a major update and you want everyone to update a certain version before updating any further, then you can add the code here and read my README on some update guidelines. It's a bit long, so you can do it at your own time because this code is open source. This is actually my website. Then you return the release, but what is the get latest release? It basically turns the GitHub API response for this release into the update, the Tauri update response API that it's expecting. And you may see here that it even takes care of the signature, even though the signature is provided as a downloadable file. So how do we do this? Well, we first get the release API response from GitHub, and we do some boilerplate. So the version is the release tag name. Since we can start things with V, we can have the version here. If you want to be smart about it and take into account scenarios where someone might mess up the release process and use a different tag that does not start with a V, then you can do some other things. But since our action runs on a tag that starts with a V, it should be good, but you can always do your own thing. Next, we have notes. So over here, I've taken the liberty to use the body as the notes, and I've removed this end section over here. And I've also stripped any new lines or catered returns so that it's pretty nice. If we had multiple lines, it would look really nice on the front end or in the dialog box. Next is the publish date. So the publish date is fortunately the same as GitHub's published at. It follows the same ISO format, and I'm not going to explain the ISO format because I'm just assuming you're going to use GitHub Actions anyways. Now for the hard part, or relatively hard part, which is platforms. Platforms can be Linux x86-64, Darwin ARM, and Windows 64-bit. Okay? That's according to their example, by the way. It might be even more than that. It's possible. It's possible. But that's what GitHub's Actions support. I'm not too sure about this ARM thing, so I've kept that the same as a 64-bit. We'll see if my app runs on Mac in the future. But let's look into this really quickly. Okay, so we have all this. We are going to, for each platform like this, we're going to link it to a file ending. As we see here, the app image is not used. The app image archive is used. So we need to link to all those archives. And so we iterate through all these releases, and we can't guarantee the signature will appear afterwards after the archive. Okay, so just take that into account when you're coding. So if the asset ends with the archive or the signature archive, we want to update platforms and the platform with the URL and the signature. So we just assume that the signature is there, or it can't be there. So we use this special ** for this behavior of creating a dictionary out of a dictionary and adding URL to it. And that URL is nothing but the browser download URL. When we encounter a signature file, we don't want to, Tauri doesn't accept a signature download, it accepts a signature itself. So Tauri is expecting a string, not a download link. So what do? We just make a request to that download link for the signature to get the signature. And then we add it the same way to signature, and then we return release response. But now you may be thinking, okay, that's 3 requests every time that's 4 requests every time you call this function. That's true. So I've done a cache that replenishes every 5 minutes. So the cache is going to be at most 5 minutes old, okay? And so you could have multiple apps call this function, and this is to prevent from throttling GitHub, and it won't slow your server down. It'll only slow your server down that first request. And I'm thinking if you have many users, like millions of users, that this caching would be very effective. You might even do it a different way, but this is for cost-effective measures, right? Because I'm a cost-effective person. But anyways, that's it for the backend code. And of course, just make sure you read the README if you want to do some intermediate versions. I've done some design work for you. I've thought about the design. So next, how do we get this front end looking, nice looking update UI? Note that there's 2 of them. That's because I'm running React in the development mode. If we were to run this in the release version, which is somewhere here, modern desktop app template, source Tauri, target release. Oh, yeah. I forgot I have single instance there. But if you run it in release, it only does it once, okay? So let's go back here. What did I do differently? Well, let's take a look. We go into our app, and the first thing, like always, is to disable the dialog for the updater. I know I've said it before, but I'll say it again. And by the way, the endpoint and public key will be removed in the template you'll see on Git. This is not something I'm going to be shipping to my users if they decide to download my release. So next we go into app.jsx and we start coding from here. So we start a comment called check updates. And you want to do this as top level as possible that can use notifications of Mantine. So as long as you can show this notification or a modal, that's the top level you'll do it because you want this code to run as quickly as possible. And I've also added this check update on this level instead of subscribing to events, which is another way to do it that they show, or they kind of show. And let's get started. You don't actually need these states here. I had that as old code. So there's only one thing we want to do, which is start install. And this means that when a user clicks this button, you want to start the installation process and then relaunch afterwards. The relaunch is going to happen regardless of the after install update completes. It's gonna quit the app already. Okay, so relaunch here is for different operating systems to ensure the behavior is the same. You want to use the show notification after someone clicks this install and relaunch so that things are good. So I will show you how to do this. Let's refresh this page. And you can see that it says installing update version 1.0.14 will relaunch afterwards. So in both of these scenarios, we want to make sure that the user, it does not auto close in case the user is doing their own thing, like opening the app, getting coffee, and coming back. And when they close it, we don't have to do anything else. So let me just uncomment that really quickly. And remember, I'm using I18N or internationalization, the library. So I've used T over here. You can add these strings to your thing. I haven't added the French version yet, so don't get angry at me. I also haven't added the hotkey here, so I'll add the hotkey. So what else do we have? We need a use effect so that we're checking for update only once. Because when we're using the app like that, the app might re-render or trigger a re-render, and we don't want to subscribe to that event twice. So we don't want to check for updates on every render. You could do a smart thing where you check for update every hour, and if the updated version is different from the last checked update, you can notify the user of a newer update. That's possible too, but that's a bit out of the scope. Anyways, as you can see here, I believe things can go wrong. So what you want to do is make sure that should update is actually used here, and if it is, then only do we show that an update is available. So const version is the new version. Body gets turned into release notes. And then we show a notification, which is update version 1.0.14 is available. And now I'm actually using the same endpoint as the Google Keep if you didn't catch that. And the color I've decided to use is teal. And it's not just the same teal. I've decided to use multiple versions of teal. So if it's the dark mode, I'm using the normal teal, which gets darker on when you hover. But for, oh wait, hold on. But in light mode, I'm using this darker teal. I guess it's darker. No, it's lighter. Sorry, it's lighter, and it gets darker on hover. And that's because I can notice that this version of the teal is hard to read, but looks better on light theme than the dark one. And yeah, it's just a user experience point of view. As you can see, the teal, it's really hard to read now on the light, but it's easy to read on the dark. And same here, easy to read in the light and harder to read in the dark. You may not notice that, but my eyes notice that, so I have that issue. So that's there for people like me who have trouble reading stuff sometimes. And when the user clicks install update, like I said before, we just run that. That is it for the video. Like I said before, this is one of the most complicated technical parts of this entire series, and it's really painful to do, and I somehow did it. And I gave a lot of feedback to the Tauri developers on so that you guys don't struggle in the future if you're reading documentation. And I hope this video was really useful if you are using Tauri in production and are going to release your app even before I do, because I know I'd find this helpful. So I'm just making this for you guys. And in the future, I might do videos on the system tray as well as the single instance that I will show you in the next video. Okay? So have fun and hope you guys really enjoyed this. I'm not sure if you guys are, yeah. Anyways, peace.